Mujahideen was created by the CIA to cause problems for the Soviets. And you might say that's crazy talk, right? Here's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
To be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. How? Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of Mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We were just so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now. Everything's going to be so much better. Now you look back, the people we're fighting today, we were supporting in the fight against the Soviets.
On this anniversary of September 11th, we don't just look back at what took place 11 years ago today, but what the next 11 years have meant for the United States, including our ongoing war with Afghanistan. In his exclusive one-on-one interview with President Obama, Ben asked the commander-in-chief about why the U.S. has been fighting in al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Yemen, and yet seemingly supporting al-Qaeda in Syria.
Years ago today, most Americans had never heard of an Islamist group with an Arabic name meaning the base. But within a matter of days and for the next decade, the name al-Qaeda would become synonymous with terrorism. And 11 years later, we're still fighting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and in Yemen. Though our history with al-Qaeda is very complicated. To begin with, it was the United States government that created al-Qaeda in the first place. It was during the 1970s. The U.S. decided to create an Islamist extremist group to sow the seeds of discord in the Stans, like Pakistan and Afghanistan. The goal was to create problems for the Soviets.
You mentioned about al-Qaeda during your speech, going after al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, certainly going after them in Yemen as well. Yeah. And yet there's some concern about the U.S. funding the Syrian opposition when there are a lot of reports that al-Qaeda is kind of heading up that opposition. How do you justify the two?
Well, I share that concern, and so what we've done is to say we will provide non-lethal assistance to Syrian opposition leadership that are committed to a political transition, committed to an observance of human rights. We're not going to just dive in and get involved with a civil war that in fact involves some elements of people who are genuinely trying to get a better life, but also involve some folks who would over the long term do the United States harm.
So what about what the president said there? It is true that publicly the United States is providing non-lethal support to Syria. According to a report from Reuters, the State Department says the U.S. government set aside a total of $25 million for non-lethal assistance to the Syrian opposition. A U.S. official said that was mostly for communications equipment, including encrypted radios. But there are questions about what else the U.S. has been doing. Well, right now the U.S. is providing non-lethal assistance. We are facilitating other countries. According to the New York Times, the weapons, including automatic rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, ammunition, and some anti-tank weapons, are being funneled mostly across the Turkish border by way of a shadowy network of intermediaries, including Syria's Muslim Brotherhood.
U.S. government contracts awarded to companies with alleged ties to terror groups. Some of those terror groups targeting American forces. ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross on the trail.
With Americans still being attacked every week in Afghanistan, the U.S. government has worked hard to find out who has helped pay for the continued and deadly insurgent strikes, only to discover that among those connected to the terrorists were companies also working as contractors for the U.S. government, according to these two lists produced by the military and the Commerce Department. U.S. officials say the companies already have received about $150 million in U.S. taxpayer money over the years.
The United States government subsidizing the Taliban, al-Qaeda, the Haqqani network, those groups that are trying to shoot and kill our soldiers.
Among them, a road construction company that the U.S. says is partly owned by a leader of that brutal Haqqani network. Blamed for an attack on the U.S. Embassy 2 years ago that killed 16 people. The company denies any ties to terrorists, But sensitive U.S. military documents obtained by ABC News claim the profits, approximately $1 to $2 million per month, flowed to HQN, the Haqqani network, to finance its activities.
It's history, and it's history that's being repeated in Libya and now in Syria. But there is a bigger problem here, one that every American should be questioning. We're fighting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but we're also bombing al-Qaeda targets in Pakistan and in Yemen. And as we do that, something occurs known as collateral damage. Hundreds of civilians in Yemen have been killed in just the first half of 2012 by U.S. airstrikes aimed at al-Qaeda fighters.
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work. And it was President Reagan, in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen. And let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated. They lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which is, it wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow because we will harvest. And we now are making up for a lot of lost time.
So what you need to know tonight is heavy. Our government is bombing sites around the world in an ongoing war with al-Qaeda. In Iraq, where al-Qaeda had no presence before the U.S. war, al-Qaeda is now thriving. The same al-Qaeda, yes, created by the U.S. government in order to harm the Soviets. And today, at least 13,000 civilians in Afghanistan are dead as a result of that war with al-Qaeda.
Let's get some disturbing news coming out of the White House. This from Reuters via Yahoo News. Obama seeks $500 million from Congress to help moderate Syrian rebels. Oh, I wish this was satire. This is what it says. President Barack Obama, under pressure from some lawmakers to provide more help to Syrian opposition, asked the U.S. Congress on Thursday to approve $500 million to train and equip moderate Syrian rebels seeking to oust President Bashar Assad.
ISIS, the Islamic jihadist group said to be too extreme even for al-Qaeda and is threatening the Iraqi state, has just been given the dubious title of world's best resourced terrorist organization.
The real disturbing part of this is the first paragraph of this story. President Barack Obama, under pressure from some lawmakers to provide some help to Syrian opposition. Wait a second. Who are these lawmakers and what sort of pressure are they putting him under?
Up to the point of when they were about to take Mosul, their estimated worth was, or estimated money that they had at their disposal, about $875 million. They then took Mosul, and they seized millions of dollars, or hundreds of millions of dollars, in gold bullion and in cash, and all the equipment the Americans had left there. So they've got all these Humvees and all this other hardware.
Apache helicopters.
Members of the Islamic State of Iraq, the ISIS, were trained by U.S. military. The officials said dozens of IS members were trained, about thousands, at the time as part of a covert aid to insurgents targeting the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The officials said the training was not meant to be used for any future campaign in Iraq. Yeah, right. That's why they did the base right on the border with Iraq. The Jordanian officials said the ISIS members who received U.S. training to fight in Syria were first vetted for any links to extremist groups like al-Qaeda. Well,
how can a group, I ask myself, how can a group that started as a ragtag bunch of extremists now be worth, or not worth, sorry, have at their fingertips best part of $2 billion? I mean, and it's so troubling because the fact that they've overtaken Tikrit, they've overtaken Mosul, they're threatening to advance on Baghdad. So let's just quickly look at where it's come from.
Yes, thank you, sir. I had one follow-up point. In my own research, I discovered that on October 31st, 2012, Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, arrived at Zagreb International Airport in Croatia. Now, coincidentally, several weeks later, and this was uncovered by the New York Times in a paper in England. 75 cargo plane loads started moving through that airport, the exact same airport Hillary visited. Those weapons were coming from Croatia, and they were going through Turkey and through Jordan and right to the border, and then they were trucked over the border into Syria, the same MO.
Oh, no, that's all on record. They actually had al-Qaeda bases in Iraq.
So let's just kind of run through the best case scenario, because I don't want to be blamed for being some sort of anti-liberal agenda sort of spin on this. The best case scenario is we give the money to the Syrian rebels. We forget the fact that we're trying to kill half these Syrian rebels if they're in Yemen, and we fund them. We train them, and we equip them. They win. They oust President Bashar Assad. Now what? Since that's the goal ISIS wanted in the first place, if I was ISIS, I'd be thinking, well, you just handed me my goal on a silver platter. You just funded my objective, if I was ISIS. So essentially, you're giving $500 million to ISIS, even in the best case scenario. And then what's ISIS going to do? Are they just going to say, oh, well, we give up, totally give up. The Syrian rebels have won. They're the ones that ousted the president, so it's theirs now. No, of course not. They're going to say, hey, wait a second, wait. You mean the rebels, who are supposedly these peace-loving civilians who just want to take up arms against a totalitarian president, you mean they just took over the country? Let's kill them. I mean, think about this for a second. ISIS, which is literally creating a new nation because of their destructive behavior in the Middle East, the Syrian government couldn't defeat them. The Iraqi government, which was funded and trained by us, they couldn't defeat them, but somehow rebels are supposed to defeat them? No. By doing this, the best case scenario is you're funding ISIS and you're handing them over Syria.
It is the question that every American should be demanding answers on from Congress and from this president. Why are we giving al-Qaeda fighters money and weapons to overthrow yet another government in the Middle East? Today, our government claims they're freeing the people of Syria. Tomorrow, if history tells us anything, we will be killing and wounding civilians in airstrikes and then referring to them as collateral damage in a war with an enemy who we brought to power.
What? Sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and that's great. Let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union.
From Washington now, the president speaking just a short time ago, thanking Congress for approving and funding his plan to fight ISIS, training moderate Syrian rebels on the ground. And it comes